This is where most people start blaming themselves. They think like, I have no willpower. I can't stop eating. I don't know how to stop eating when I'm full. Something's wrong with me. But what's actually happening is that your hunger and fullness signals have been disrupted at the hormonal level. Hello and welcome back to another new episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, and we're going to talk about 3 ways emotional overeating destroys hormone balance. And by the end of the episode, you're going to understand exactly why emotional overeating creates hormonal chaos in your body and why that chaos makes the pattern of emotional overeating so much harder to break. And I'm going to go into some things that maybe no one has ever told you about. We're going to kind of unpack all of it. And at the end, you're going to see that it's not really a you problem or a willpower problem, but it's really a biology problem. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. And I think it's really going to support you in just feeling better and just understanding how to move through the situation. So the first thing I want you to understand is that emotional overeating is not a food problem. It never was. It's a stress response. This particular stress response has a hormonal signature that runs through your entire body. So when you're eating in a dysregulated state, whether that's stressed, hypervigilant, numb, anxious, overwhelmed, you're not just consuming food. Right? When you're overeating in this state, what you're doing is you're triggering a biochemical cascade that over time rewires how your body actually stores fat, how it reads hunger, and how it actually balances your hormones. And I'm talking about stress hormones, hunger hormones, and reproductive hormones, and they all work together in a cycle, and you're going to see how that works. So let's walk through them. Okay, the 3 specific ways. So way number 1 is cortisol and insulin. What emotional overeating does to your cortisol and insulin is so important. And honestly, when I understood this, it really unlocked something for me that helped me just understand that this isn't just about me being more disciplined. This isn't just about me getting more control. Because when you're eating emotionally, you're almost never eating from a calm, regulated place. You're eating because something happened, right? A hard conversation, a long day, a feeling you didn't know what to do with, something that activated an emotion or a feeling inside you. And in that moment, your body is already flooded with cortisol, right? Which is your primary stress hormone. Okay. And its job at the core is to prepare you to activate, right? To prepare you for a threat. It spikes your blood sugar. This is the biochemical nature of it. It spikes your blood sugar. It slows digestion, and it signals we're in danger. We don't have time to properly process food right now because digestion is secondary to survival, right? If we need to survive, the body's going to release blood sugar for energy. It's not going to worry about digesting properly. Okay. But what happens in this moment when you're feeling this way and you're activated this way and you eat, and usually what you eat in this state is something sweet, something fast, something that promises relief, because those are often foods that soothe the nervous system more quickly based on its taste, texture, many different things. And they also spike dopamine really quickly. Those foods have chemicals in them that attach on to the dopamine receptors. But here is what ends up happening next. When you eat those foods, while cortisol is already elevated, your insulin response, it ends up going into overdrive. Okay, your body is trying to manage this blood sugar spike while simultaneously managing a stress hormone. And when these two systems are constantly colliding day after day, stress response after stress response, your cells start to become less sensitive to insulin signal. You have to produce more and more insulin to do the same job. Okay. And this is actually, believe it or not, the beginning of diabetes, right? This is how diabetes, type 2 diabetes starts. So a chronically elevated insulin is one of the most powerful fat storage signals in the human body, especially around the belly area. And it's not because you ate too much. So people think that it's about the volume or the too many carbs or something, or too much, too much junk food, or being bad. But that's not it. It's not that you're bad. It's just that your body was in a chronic stress state every single time you had these emotional overeating situations. And over time, it got less efficient at its job. So I remember, and I've shared pieces of this before, that there was a long stretch in my own life where, I felt like I was putting so much energy, so much effort into weight loss, right? I was watching a lot of stuff. I was, probably eating less, being very particular and, strict about what I was eating. And the scale was not moving, right? The scale just wasn't moving at all. And what I didn't really connect the dots with was that the emotional overeating that I was doing in my private time, there would be these maybe like 7 days where I would be super quote unquote good, but then I would have these weekends or something where I would emotionally overeat, or all these different things. The chronic, just like hypervigilance of watching what you eat, was keeping my cortisol and my insulin in this constant state of tug of war, right? Because I was in this hypervigilant state. And then, I kept getting more and more insulin resistant with the overeating. That's the thing. Like, the pattern of my behavior was more the problem. It wasn't that I was the problem. I mean, obviously I had to learn how to change my behavior, but the way my body looked was more of an outcome of the biological pattern that was happening, not so much the food that I was eating. The actual substance of the food that I was eating. It was the internal environment that I was eating in that was actually more detrimental than anything else. You've built a good life. From the outside, it looks like you have it all together. You eat clean, you work hard, you take care of everyone. But there's this one area that still feels impossible to master, and that is food. You can eat perfectly all day and still end up in the kitchen at night wondering why you keep doing this. You promise yourself you'll start fresh tomorrow, and I know you mean it every single time. But the cycle, it always finds its way back, especially when you're stressed, when you're overwhelmed, or when you're just tired of being the one that's holding it all together. And I get it because I lived that way for years. And what I learned is this: the problem, it was never about food. It was the pressure underneath it, the perfectionism, the self-doubt, the part of me that never felt safe and secure to just be me. And that's why I created the sober eating sequence. It's a proven 3-phase method that rewires the emotional patterns and the belief systems driving overeating, so you can relax, trust yourself around food, and release weight completely naturally, without force and without obsession. Because when your body feels secure, it lets go. The cravings quiet, the self-punishment, it softens, and food, it stops being the thing that you have to fix. This is not another plan. This isn't another rule book. It's a revolutionary transformation for your nervous system, for your body, and for your identity. So join the sober eating movement today. So the second way is leptin and ghrelin. Okay, so the second way that emotional overeating disrupts your hormones, and this can get a little bit confusing because it's one that I think gets people the most frustrated, because these are the hormones that are in charge of your hunger and fullness signals, right? Leptin is your satiety hormone, and it's made in your fat cells. And its job is to tell the brain, we have had enough, we could stop. And Ghrelin is your hunger hormone, right? It rises before meals and falls after you eat. That's its homeostasis. That's its regulated state. And when we're in a regulated state, it's a beautiful rhythm, right? You get hungry, you eat, you feel satisfied, you stop. It's so simple. But when you're in a chronic state of emotional overeating, especially when you're eating highly processed, high sugar, high fat foods in a stressed state, your brain starts to become desensitized to the satiety signal. Okay. And this is actually called leptin resistance. Okay. And it means that even when your body has more than enough stored energy, stored calories, stored food, your brain never quite gets the signal that you're full, right? You keep waiting for this satisfaction signal that isn't arriving clearly. And at the same time, the hunger hormone stays elevated longer than it should because of the emotional state. So you're getting these hunger signals that you think are hunger signals, right? More frequently, and even after you've already eaten, right? And this is where most people start blaming themselves. They think like, I have no willpower. I can't stop eating. I don't know how to stop eating when I'm full. Something's wrong with me. But what's actually happening is that your hunger and fullness signals have been disrupted at the hormonal level. Your nervous system has been trained over time to expect food as its primary coping tool, and your appetite hormones, the ones that we just were talking about, have reorganized themselves around that expectation. This is essentially a survival mechanism, and it often starts when we're very young. It really does. This sort of behavior, and that's why it really takes dedication, patience, compassion, time to rewire this specific thing, because it really is a trust thing. You have to rebuild trust with your body. All right. And the third way is one that I think surprises women the most, but it's how emotional overeating actually dismantles your estrogen and progesterone balance. And this is one of the reasons why you might feel this more, why you might start noticing how emotional overeating, and that you might be an emotional overeater a little later in life, like middle age or late 30s, early 40s, as perimenopause starts to happen, potentially because naturally these hormones start to get a little bit more out of whack. But it's really an interesting insight, because most of us don't think about our reproductive hormones when we think about our eating habits, right? And that's why I said it really only as you get to like early middle age, perimenopause time, you start to see it more. As you understand more about the body and about biology, you realize that your hormonal system is not a collection of separate departments, right? It's not different compartments here. It's one ecosystem, and every part of this hormonal ecosystem is in conversation with every part all the time. Okay. So this is really an important thing to listen to. It's actually like mind blowing. So chronically elevated cortisol, right, which we talked about, which, as we know, runs alongside emotional overeating, actually competes directly with progesterone for the same receptor sites of the body. So you want to think of it like this. Cortisol shows up at the party and starts using progesterone seat. And progesterone, which is more of like your calming, balancing, sleep supportive, circadian rhythm balancing hormone, gets crowded out. Right? It's why progesterone is actually one of the most common hormone replacement therapies in perimenopausal women, because of this specifically. And so when progesterone drops relative to estrogen, you get what's called estrogen dominance. And the symptoms read like a checklist that so many of my clients recognize immediately, right? Mood swings, bloating, sleep disruption, intense sugar cravings. And again, especially in the second half of your cycle, okay? Like weight that won't budge no matter what you do, particularly, in the hips and the thighs, per se as well. And here's the kind of cycle that makes it feel so insidious is that estrogen dominance makes your nervous system more reactive to stress, right? It makes you more emotionally sensitive. It makes you less resilient, right? More likely to reach for food to cope, which ultimately keeps cortisol elevated, which continues to crowd out progesterone, which continues to go into that insulin cycle that we talked about. And the cycle continues to go and actually becomes more and more like laminated, right? Becomes more and more just rigid, right? I spent so many years feeling what I can only describe as quote unquote hormonal without ever understanding why, right? I thought that I was just wired that way and maybe I was too sensitive, too reactive. Believe me, I had plenty of people telling me that was the case as well. But I had no idea that I was living in a cortisol state that was reorganizing, subtly reorganizing. And it's like a chronic thing. So it does take time. So it's not an immediate thing, but basically impacting my entire hormonal landscape. And every time that I would have, these binges and these purges and these, episodes of the emotional overeating and the shame and then the swings back and forth, I was reinforcing this state. One of the biggest things was like, I had to stop blaming myself. I had to stop feeling shame. I had to stop personalizing all of this. And I had to realize that, yes, there was a part that I had to take responsibility for the behavior and change that and, heal that and rewire that. But there was also a biological core happening here. And I was, and that was part of it too, right? And realizing that the distinction, right? That there was nothing wrong with me. I was just in a state of reacting to everything rather than responding. And I had to learn how to respond. I had to learn how to respond to life and not react to life, right? And that's one of the biggest things I teach in all of my programs, the Invisible Weight Detox, the Sober Eating Sequence. Like, we learn so many things in those programs, but really just changing from this constant cortisol state to a state of responding so that your hormones could stay balanced and really support the work, support the healing, support the changes. Such a big part of it. The important thing is really recognizing that and trying to move away from the idea that this is a food problem, right? That this hormonal imbalance is a food problem. And what it actually is, a nervous system and hormonal healing journey alongside the rest of the healing journey, right? And when you address the root, when you address the emotional triggers, what causes your stress, how you respond to stress, and you start to create these other anchors in your life, your cortisol comes down. And when your cortisol comes down, insulin stabilizes, right? And when insulin stabilizes, you start to feel satiety. You start to feel satisfaction. You start to rewire your brain to understand what satisfaction is, right? Progesterone stops getting crowded out. Your hunger signals start to regulate. The cravings are less. And the urgency around food fades, right? The hyper focus around food, feeling like you just can't think of anything else, quote unquote, food noise, that fades, right? And you'll notice also that you start to become friends with yourself more. You start to feel like you don't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be, it's okay to sometimes have like a meal that's overindulgent and, it's fine. Food doesn't feel like this constant battle anymore, right? Or something that you can never quite get right. It starts to become like less dramatic, which is essentially what we want, right? We want to be able to enjoy food, but it doesn't have to be drama. Right? We have to learn how to feel something without it being dramatic. And this is how I knew that I was healing, right? In my journey, this is how I knew that I was healing. And it wasn't because the scale moved first, right? And, many people that have been listening to me for a while know that it did eventually move for me, right? I did eventually lose 40 pounds that I fluctuated so many years. But really it was when I stopped feeling at war with myself, and my own body, right? When I just felt calmer around my food choices, when I didn't feel like I was overcome by this intrusive thoughts about food consistently, right? When I could feel negativity or activated without immediately needing to, soothe myself with food. And this is what is possible, right? This is what is possible. This is what so many women that I've worked with have experienced, this freedom, because this is freedom. That is all I have for you today. And I'm excited to dive deeper into these conversations. If you are interested in more topics about hormone balance, please leave us a comment. Let us know. Please like and subscribe to us on Spotify, on Apple. Rate us 5 stars. It's really helping us, get more views on our podcast. You can rate us 5 stars on Apple, on Spotify. Leave us a written review there if you feel so inclined. YouTube, we're there. Please subscribe there. Like, hype us up. And until next time, I'm Alana, and thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.